Tonight, the Athenaeum is proud to present a dedicated Athenaeum trustee, journalist, and best-selling author. Her work has appeared in publications including the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Food and Wine, and the New York Times. She's an alumna of Princeton University and co-founder of the Huffington Post Technology section. Tonight, she'll be discussing her latest New York Times and national bestseller, Get the Picture, a mind-bending journey among the inspired artists and obsessive art fiends who taught me how to see, which is also available for purchase directly after the talk, following the Q&A. Please help me welcome BIANCA Bosker.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening, and thank you for having me. I wrote a great deal of this book downstairs, right here. When the library closed, I moved out into the garden. So if you saw that weirdo, like this pale girl in the shadows, that was me with my laptop. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. I feel like I have found my fellow indoor kids. Everyone else is finishing up their 18th hole or whatever it is, like the last round at Cisco, but you are here indoors, growing your mind, and I am so proud of you all and so grateful. I'm going to be talking to you about art tonight, which is a little surreal because for a long time, Art and I were not on speaking terms. Going to galleries and museums would give me this great sense of inferiority. I felt like I was at least 2 tattoos and a master's degree away from figuring out what the heck was going on. And this is an erudite crowd, but maybe some of you have had that experience. You walk into these aggressively lit white rooms with their perfect white walls and, hushed chambers, and you turn a corner to find a bunch of people really thoughtfully contemplating a sculpture of decaying vegetables on a stained mattress. And you sort of have this feeling okay, everyone gets the punchline except me. And I had that feeling a lot, perhaps you did. And I'm here to talk about how it's not just you. There is a hidden logic to the way that the art world keeps people out, but there's also a way around it. Now, I can't imagine that much would have changed in my own relationship with art, except a few years back, I was in my hometown in Portland, Oregon, and I was helping my mom purge her basement. My mother is here tonight. Thank you for your very messy basement. It's where all good book ideas begin. And I happened to come across my grandmother's dancing carrots. And this was a watercolor, a painting she had made of these 3 nimble, lithe carrots with tiny little black commas for feet, and it had hung in her kitchen for as long as I could remember, until she died. And this painting was inspired by her time as a Holocaust survivor at a displaced persons camp after the war, where she had started teaching art classes to the children. At the time, she didn't have a child herself. She had studied economics. She had no background in art to speak of that I knew of. And yet, she had turned to art in this moment when life turned itself inside out. And these carrots haunted me. They trailed me back to New York, and they kept dancing my mind round and round this question of why she had treated art, which to me was the least essential thing, the sort of luxury that you get to, after everything else is figured out. Why had she treated art as essential? And I began to be haunted by this fear that by turning my back on art, I was missing out on something really big. And so I thought, okay, I was older, I was wiser, let's try this whole art thing again. So I started going back out to galleries and museums, and the art was still utterly confusing to me. I truly did not understand what was going on, whether it was really art. But the people fascinated me. I am someone who is obsessed with obsession. That's sort of a through line through the 2 books I've written, I guess through 3, 4, who's counting? But, it's kind of a through line through my work. And these art fiends hooked me. I mean, I'd never met a group of people willing to sacrifice so much for something of so little obvious practical value. Gallery owners who maxed out credit cards to show these misshapen lumps of metal they swore could change the world, artists who treated 100-year-old paintings like they were as necessary as vital organs. And I was intrigued to discover that scientists are actually right there with them in insisting that art is a fundamental part of our humanity. As one biologist puts it, as necessary to us as food or sex. There was also something kind of personally, I'll just say, upsetting about being around these artists, which is that they made my own life feel really claustrophobic by comparison. I was, perhaps like some of you, a really hyper-optimized, okay, let's just say neurotic individual who, would do things like text from the toilet while listening to podcasts on 2 times speed, like, sick puppy. And these artists, they had this expansive approach to life. They behaved like they'd access these trap doors in their brains. And I was just consumed with this question of whether I could see art, whether I could see the world the way they did, and what might change if I could. And so I decided I was going to throw myself into the nerve center of the fine art world and see what I could figure out. Now, when I say throw myself in, I do mean it rather literally. I'm a journalist, as Anne said, and like a lot of journalists, I do interviews, I read research reports and books and studies, but I also believe in learning by doing. I've discovered, it is one thing for someone to give you some polite answers to, how they, sell a painting, and it's quite another, I know now, to, spend 8 hours on your feet schmoozing with millionaires and selling thousands of dollars of art from the backseat of an Uber while people do cocaine around you. And so I'm getting ahead of myself. What I wanted to do is really get inside. I wanted to see firsthand, how does an artwork go from being the germ of an idea in an artist's studio to this kind of cultural icon that we obsess over in museums. Because I felt like all the decisions that affect an artwork are also ultimately decisions that affect us, our idea of what art is, who makes it, why we should bother to engage with it. And so I thought, I want to get inside. I had this admittedly very pushy plan that I wanted to go and work in the art world. No one except me thought this was a good idea. I started reaching out to people, really anyone, art experts, curators, collectors, friends of friends of friends, cousins working in the art world, trying to get answers. And instead of answers to my admittedly straightforward questions, like how do you do art? Why does this matter? I got threats, warnings. An art collector told me that what I wanted to do was a terrible idea if I wanted to keep living in New York City. He basically intimated that my whole plan of, going and working in the art world would lead to me having to enter some sort of witness protection program. There was a art dealer who told me that if I wrote anything he disagreed with, he would have no qualms trashing my reputation, personal, professional, psychological, you name it. Now, I have, in a previous life, done reporting in China, which is not an easy place to be a foreign journalist, since talking to a foreign journalist can get you arrested. And yet nothing prepared me for how secretive the art world would be. Truly, I had an easier time getting answers in Chengdu than in Chelsea. And this surprised me. Some of you, perhaps will tell me that I was being naive, but for me, based on everything I'd heard about the art world, I had expected to find this group of, open-minded, free spirits who just wanted to embrace as many people as possible in the warm hug of art. And it wasn't until later that I discovered that the art world has a mean streak, and in a lot of cases, it's by design. Now, eventually, I did get a job. It was my first job working for a very cool up-and-coming gallery in Brooklyn. And as I started spackling walls and writing press releases, I began to be initiated into what I would describe as the strategic snobbery that the art world uses to keep people out. But first, my boss informed me, I needed a makeover. He pulled me aside one afternoon, we were going out to lunch, to tell me, you're not the coolest cat in the art world, so having you around, it's just like lowering my coolness. So I needed, severe haircut, no jewelry. I needed, my personality needed a little work. He informed me that I came across as a little overly enthusiastic, had a terrible habit of complimenting artists during studio visits. And if you've spent any time in the art world, you probably know that the true art connoisseur basically exclusively discusses art in an affectless monotone that makes them sound like they're running out of batteries. My vocabulary needed some work. I was instructed to nix some words entirely from my lingo, so an artwork is not sold, it's placed. I was encouraged to become fluent in art speak, and if you don't know what art speak is, I'm so happy for you. But basically, art speak is this overly turgid way of speaking where the more syllables, the better. There's probably like some unnecessary German words thrown in there. But basically, what an art critic would call the indexical marks of the artist's body would be finger painting to you and me. And these days, to sound like you know something about art, the trick is basically to sound like a French professor who's been the victim of a terrible translation job, which is, some people argue, exactly where art speak got its roots. Now, as I got further into the rhythms, I began to pick up on other ways that the insiders tried, the quote-unquote insiders, I take issue with that term for reasons we can discuss, but the way that these gatekeepers tried to keep out the Joe Schmoes, which was one dealer's term for the general public. So, where you put your gallery. A lot of galleries were located less like stores than speakeasies, up a flight of stairs in a building that could just as easily house apartments with probably no sign out front that include helpful words like art or gallery. And even if you could find the art, good luck finding out much more than that. Galleries typically withhold prices and then refuse to sell you things even if they're for sale. And I will say, if there was a silver lining to this, it's that I wasn't nuts. I was like, okay, well, no wonder I'd felt so alienated from the art world. The art world was evidently doing its best to keep out the schmoletariat. And there was a twisted sort of reasoning behind it. Part of it was this sense that keeping out the rest of us was a way to build mystique. It was a way to concentrate power in the hands of gatekeepers. It was a way to create this aura around art as though it was this elite purview of a self-anointed few. And I don't know about you, but this did not sit well with me. I was dead set on developing my eye. I wanted to not just stare in art's direction, I wanted to see it. I wanted to have a conversation with it. I wanted to understand what was transcendent about a sculpture of, like a brutalized chair. And artists, when I initially started talking to them, they diagnosed me as suffering from a rather problematic condition, which was that I lacked an eye. I didn't have visual literacy, which they said was downright dangerous in a world so saturated with images. And so an eye, for the connoisseur, it's not just an organ. An eye is this painstakingly cultivated outlook that, according to them, enables you to see so much that doesn't meet the eye, like who will be the next Warhol, or what's amazing about an artist sitting at a table just staring at people. And so this quest to try and get this eye eventually led me to work with artists, get a job as a security guard at a museum, work in other different galleries. But what I found especially frustrating at the outset was that these deliberately erected barriers to entry didn't just apply to buying the art, but to appreciating the art. And so many of the connoisseurs that I was meeting spent what to me felt like surprisingly little time discussing the merits of the artworks themselves. And instead they asked questions like, where did the artist go to school? What gallery has shown their work? Who owns it? Who are they sleeping with right now? All of that was the context around the art. The web of names around an artist was the context. That context seemed to influence people's opinion of the work even more than the thing itself. And that bothered me. I felt like, all that emphasis on context was, one kind of encouraging me to outsource my eye to the hive mind. It also felt like another way to keep out the schmoes, because these experts become so much more important if we're told that we need years of going to art fairs, advanced degrees, and the right, pair of jeans to commune with a painting. And so I began to look for other ways. I was like, where else can I go? What else can I see to try and build this eye, to go deeper, to go past the context? And as December neared at that particular time, I began to hear about Miami. Miami was short for Miami Art Week, which was short for a week-long bacchanal of pills, parties, powders, all held ostensibly in the name of shopping for art. And I, of course, was intrigued. What can I say? You know, I'd experienced the Pure. I'd been at the cool Brooklyn Gallery. I was interested to know what went on with the Pure aisle. One veteran described it as described it as the bourgeois indulgence that precedes a communist revolution. How could you miss that? So I ended up finding another gallery that agreed to take me on. They said I could come and work with them. I could come and sell art, but on the condition that I had to get in there and sell it, to go on the floor. They were doing one of these fairs, and so I packed up, went to Miami, where I spent a week, as I said, you know, hobnobbing with billionaires and also feasting my eye on this incredible array of art. I mean, there were countless fairs. There were, you know, people whose houses are bigger than JFK. I mean, you know, art all over the place. And it was an incredible supermarket sweep. It was a fantastic education of the eye. But it was also, as I realized toward the end of it, an immersion in a very particular type of art, a type of art that the, you know, cool Brooklyn kids would describe in. This is not a descriptor. This is considered actually kind of an insult, which they would describe as colorful painting. So colorful painting was, I mean, that is the kind of thing that is uttered with so much contempt. You have to it's like dripping. You have to get out a mop. I mean, it's crazy. But colorful painting was, you know, sort of deemed kind of pleasant, easy to sell. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I should say, there is FU art. I don't know what I'm allowed to say in such an august institution, but you know, that's the kind of thing where you're like, why is someone's melted candle sitting at MoMA? You know, so that would be what art critics call ungenerous. You've got colorful painting and the FU art on the other. And I will say, at the end of that week, I began to crave something a little weirder, something a little odder. And so I came back to New York and began on this journey to go check out art off the beaten track, which is how I ended up at a gallery in an artist's apartment in Queens, run out of his cat tree. I don't know if any of you have cats, but it's basically a cat scratching post. So he would host these shows there. If you can imagine, the sculptures were about yay big. It's called Catbox Contemporary. And I met an artist who was staging a show there who invited me a few days later to come with her to the opening of a show by an artist named Mandy Allfire. Now, I had never heard of Mandy Allfire. But this artist who invited me sent me the press release about her work. And according to the press release, Mandy Allfire was, I'm going to give you the context, an artist with an MFA from Columbia, which is one of the top art schools in the country, if you're counting, and also a track record of performing at some of the most august art venues in the country. And yet, for the past few years, she had been performing. I hope I'm making Athenaeum history here by talking about this. She had been performing as an ass influencer on Instagram. Don't expect you to know what that is by any means. An ass influencer is someone who has acquired a following of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people by posting photos of their butt. And Allfire had invited people to come to this opening so she could do a live face sitting. Again, maybe this is familiar to all of you. Excuse me if I'm going over familiar territory, but a live face sitting was where she was going to sit on, she invited her fans to come so she could sit on their faces until, and I quote, they couldn't take it anymore. Now, I don't know about you, you may be more enlightened than I am, but I read this press release and I was like, this is everything wrong with the art world. Like, this is the sign of the decline and fall of Western civilization. Things have gone too far. And yet, it wasn't every night that a real live artist invited me to go with them to an opening, and I was trying to get into the art scene. As I said before, it was hard to get access, so I thought, okay, I'm gonna go, and maybe next time she'll invite me to something worthwhile. So I went, and I want to read you just a brief section from this evening. And what do I need to tell you? You imagine you are in Brooklyn. It's, you know, you're as far from here as possible. Let's just put it that way. It's it's industrial. A lot more black, a lot more kind of patchy haircuts, and you're going downstairs into a basement gallery. People were lined up 3 deep around Allfire, and I bobbed and weaved for a view. Orange wires dangled from the ceiling next to pairs of Allfire's lacy underwear, which were for sale, I should add. "Work that ass, work it," called a man's voice over the auto-tuned rap that thumped from a speaker somewhere. At one end of the gallery, behind a red velvet rope and on a cot fitted with a wrinkled white sheet, was Allfire herself. The art was already happening. Allfire's ass faced the audience. She wore gold hoop earrings, black eyeliner, and lacy black lingerie. A middle-aged man, slick as a manatee in nothing but leopard underwear, was stretched out on the mattress with Allfire straddling his face. Her bare feet dangled over the front of the mattress, her knees pressed the cot, and her butt crack smushed the guy's receding hairline. Like a discerning mattress shopper testing the merchandise, Allfire bounced gently on his nose. "Rich, you're next, right? You only live once, Rich," babbled a guy a few inches from Allfire's left foot, while Rich stayed mute. The crowd was equally split between men and women, with approximately 1 million raised iPhones, as well as some National Geographic quality digital cameras. "Have you ever been sat on before?" asked Allfire. She held a microphone up to her butt. "Murr," said a muffled voice from under her. "I'm your biggest fan." "Can I push harder down on you?" "Woohoo! Hurr, hurr." For 15 minutes, Allfire roosted on the man's head while she read fan mail from her followers. There were occasionally whistles, a few woos. "Rich, do it, Rich, do it, Rich, do it, Rich, do it. Come on, Rich, you only live once, man," said Rich's friend, while Rich, I assume, wanted to die. Allfire swiveled on the man's forehead and tossed her booty-length black hair over her shoulder. She put her hands on her hips and looked out over the crowd. "Is anybody else going to participate?" I have this moment on video. I've watched it at least 50 times, trying to make sense of what happened next. The blurry 22-second clip pans jerkily over someone's dirty white Converse and over a woman filming with a Steadicam, then back to Allfire's cot. Allfire adjusts herself on the guy's face, flips around, says, "Is anybody else going to participate?" and stares directly at my iPhone. Then the recording cuts off. That's when I raised my hand. When I try to think back to that moment, all I see is a solid black expanse where my brain should be. Did I think it through? I wouldn't have done it if I'd thought it through. Everyone and their mother was videotaping, I remembered belatedly as my feet carried me to the front of the room. Any hope of a political career was over, I thought. The least of my worries, but that's where my addled mind went. I thought of my poor, oblivious husband, probably knitting quietly by the fireside at home. I couldn't have said what I expected to discover by having my airways squished by a pantsless woman I'd never met, but I guess I figured art would never change my life unless I took a few chances. And anyway, before I could figure out how to politely tell Mandy I'd made a terrible mistake, thank you, but no thank you, I was stretched out on a wrinkled white sheet, covered in a full-body sweat, staring up at Allfire's bare thighs. Darkness descended. Wet warmth spread over my forehead, nose, cheeks, mouth, and chin. After a few moments, a tightness cinched my chest. I couldn't breathe. The room was silent. There were a few scattered laughs. "You might have a girlfriend after," someone called. "Make this sexy, please," said another voice. That creeped me out. I noticed from my safety blanket of an artist that an artist had told me to notice 5 things. It was extremely dark. A minute went by. Come to think of it, I'd never been anywhere so dark. Allfire was back to reading fans' messages. "I want to smell your farts." And it dawned on me that I could feel Allfire laughing before she laughed, could sense my forehead trembling before my ears heard the ha-ha. It was primal. It was like being in the deepest pit of a hug, or a cave. A few more minutes passed and my mind drifted. Was this like being in the womb, a reverse womb, something about being born again? 7 minutes went by. My breathing had slowed. My heart had stopped thudding. Allfire's body pressed mine securely. It was surprisingly peaceful. Truth be told, I wouldn't have minded taking a nap. Now, I read this to you because this was an experience that I think began to make me realize just the extent to which context can be a kind of prison, something that really limits our boundaries of what we expect and consider art. Now, I will say, I'm sure you're not convinced, but I also was not convinced after this experience that this was art. And it sent me on this quest, one that I really opened this Pandora's box I really didn't want to, of what was art. And as I got into the research, I discovered that basically the experts have thrown up their hands on trying to define this. They're like, we just don't know in this day and age. And what I was fascinated to learn, though, is that our idea of what art is today is deeply shaped by these rather arbitrary decisions that were made by status-conscious Europeans in the 1760s, who pretty arbitrarily elevated a handful of human activities like poetry, painting, sculpture into a bucket they referred to as art, fine art, and dismissed everything else as mere craft. So art could shake your soul, but craft just kept you warm and kept your feet clean when you went outside, that kind of a thing. And yet for thousands of years, art was considered anything involving human ingenuity and skill. So passing laws, blowing glass, training horses, carving marble, all of it was art, art, and more art. And when you even rewind back the clock, further, scientists argue that art is this universal human impulse. It is not this thing that we got around to doing once we, as cave people, lived past age 20 and just got a little bored one afternoon, but rather something that has been crucial to our survival. If you think about it, art is one of our oldest forms of expression, right? We invented art, we were painting long before we could write. It's, one of our oldest kind of inventions. We invented paint before the wheel, and universal, right? We all engage with art, whether we're Paleolithic humans or Parisians or preschoolers. And, Mandy Alfire, this encounter, I think was for me this initial brush into the way that I think artists have this incredibly expansive view when it comes to art, but also with the world. And that was a mindset that really I began to embrace when something clicked, I think, too. Something changed when I started actually working with artists in their studios. So I remember I got a job as a studio assistant to this very cool artist, Julie Curtis. She's more than just cool. I mean, she changed my life. But something changed for me as I sat there in her studio stretching canvases and painting backgrounds. And it dawned on me that all of the hushed murmuring about historicity and dichotomies that go on in galleries and museums hadn't prepared me for the blistery business of actually making art. I mean, it is practically athletic. I lost patches of arm hair to a sculpture. It's a sweaty, bloody business. So many decisions that go into it. And I think for the last 100 years or so, we've been told that what really matters about art is the idea behind it. The thought trumps the thing. And yet, working with artists, it made me realize how to savor art like an artist. And that meant slowing down. It meant paying attention to the physical form. It meant examining the artist's decisions. As Julie put it, she said, a painting is constant decision making. And so I had this epiphany, when I went back to exhibits for the first time in my life. I can't tell you how out of character this was. I started ignoring the wall text, the sort of the writing, like the paragraph-long piece of writing that's often under a painting. And I used to think it was downright rude when galleries and museums didn't have an explanation of each work. I was like, how am I supposed to figure this out unless you use language to tell me? But I began to realize, first of all, I took that advice I alluded to here of this artist who had told me to just notice 5 things about the work. You don't have to know even when it was made. You just pay attention to its creation. And those 5 things, it doesn't have to be something grandiose, like, well, I know what paintings we can see here, but this is a reflection of gender dynamics in the whateverth century when it was made. It could simply be like, this guy has an underbite, and like, what's did he really? Is that his decision? Or like, it seems like the artist kind of maybe painted his hand to look a little like a hoof. It's just these little things, or like the green makes me want to touch it. It's about staying in the work. And I think for me, I got to the point where I ended up working, as I said, at a guard at the Guggenheim, and I would actually stand in front of the wall labels so that people couldn't see them. Because what happens when we stay in the work is engage with the work. You can see it face to face with less pretense and more mystery than before. I think it's really the key to really engaging with art on your own terms. And I began to realize that I think context is such a tempting crutch to rely on because that's ultimately how our brains work. When we look at the world, we do not see it like video cameras. We are not accurately, dispassionately recording the world around us. Our brains are really trash compactors. Our eyes and the way they connect to our brains, they're constantly compressing information. It's the way we were built. We have these filters of expectation that descend when we look out in the world, and these filters of expectation preemptively dismiss, categorize all the raw data coming in even before we get the full picture. And so interestingly, scientists and artists have together in different ways settled on a similar explanation for why art is so crucial to our humanity. And then that's that it helps us fight those reducing tendencies of our minds. It helps us yank off that filter of expectation. It helps our minds jump out of their well-worn pathways and experience more chaos, more information, just more than we would before. And I want to end before we open up for questions with a final thought, which is I do think that there is an artist in each of us to the extent that we struggle to keep our brains from compressing our experience of the world. You know, art is a decision. It's a fight against complacency, and it's a choice to live a life that's richer, more complex, more nuanced, and ultimately so much more beautiful. I'm going to pause there. Hopefully, everyone in the background is, you know, approving of so far. Besides the ask, we can talk about the face sitting later. I'm sorry, no one was prepared for that. But maybe we have a few questions before everyone, you know, races off to where they're going and the rest of their lives. Yeah, please. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So video art, there's an art speak term for it that I always forget. It's so it's like, time-based media. I'm sure that's what you meant to say. But yes, of course, yeah, so video art. So video art is certainly, you know, video art, you know, is, it's a genre, it's a medium unto itself. And, you know, I think that one of my favorite experiences with video art, because it's one that I found kind of difficult and challenging, and I think oftentimes in museums, when you see it in a gallery in a museum, you're coming in like halfway, and you're like, is it the beginning, is it the end, is it the middle, what's happening here? And there were two things that began to make me think about it differently. One was in my, like, forcing myself into collectors' homes, I was really intrigued by the way that collectors display video art, which is just they stick it on their televisions. You know, they play it at a dinner party. They just have it running in the background. You know, you have a painting, and then on that television, you've got a video work going. And the second thing is, I remember asking this question of a video artist. I was like, what do we do in a museum? And you just, you know, if you show up like in the middle of it, how are you supposed to figure out what's going on? And her advice was, she was like, I kind of think of it like a music video, where it's like, you just come in and you have the experience, and you know, maybe not every artist feels that way, but I think that to me gave me the liberty to just sort of make peace with that sense of discomfort. And I do think, by the way, that discomfort is sort of the elephant in the room when it comes to contemporary art. I think discomfort, I was intrigued by the way that artists really endorsed feeling uncomfortable, of kind of losing yourself in front of an artwork. And I will say that that was initially something I resisted. I felt like thousands of years of evolution had trained me to try and avoid uncomfortable situations. But I think that that discomfort becomes more manageable if you just, I think, accept it, and for me at least, lead into that toolkit of just noticing things, of just staying in the work, of accepting that there are different ways into an artwork. And art history can be one of them, but it's not the only one, right? This like context of where an artist went to school, or you know where they came from, that's one, but it's not necessarily the one. I guess the last thing I'll say about video art is, so I have a young son, and We have steadfastly tried to feed him like an Amish diet of media, meaning like no screens. And the great part of this is when I take him to museums, he is obsessed with the video art. Like he's just like, what is this? And it blows his mind, and it makes me slow down and take some time with it. And I should say slowing down, that's the other key to it. You know, we do tend to spend, you know, there's studies that show we spend max maybe, you know, I don't know, on average like 17 seconds in front of an artwork. Another research that showed that we spend 4 times longer reading the label than looking at the work itself. So slow down. I'm a big advocate for slow looking. As a guard, I mean, I spent weeks, hours, you know, in front of the same artworks, and I kept finding something new about them.
Thank you. Hey, Bianca. So you are such an immersive journalist. You dive headfirst. You totally are in the deep end. You did it with wine, with Cork Dork, and now you did it with art. Get the picture. What world are you diving into now?
It's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for plugging my other book. Really appreciate that. So I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, these projects are so immersive. I mean, they take over my life. I mean, I think I said, my mom is here and 2 of my good friends are here, and it's nice that they're still my good friends, because I think I kind of dropped off the planet of the Earth for a while, surface of the planet, whatever the expression is, for a while, because, you know, I was busy having my face sat on. And I do think that whatever it is, I think both books, Cork Dork and Get the Picture, I think for me, you know, emerged out of these encounters with these people where it went just beyond kind of journalistic curiosity, and it tapped something deeper and more human, where it made me really stay up at night and worry that I was living life all wrong, that I was missing out on some really core nectar of the human experience. And I think in some sense, yeah, both of them are also, I don't know, something, while I was on the book tour for this one, it came to me that I think both books are also united by my own fear of death. Like they're both about like, you know, getting more out of life. It's like Cork Dork is very much about living sensefully. It's about tuning into these forgotten senses of taste and smell. And then Get the Picture is very much about seeing more, experiencing more. And I do think that art can, in a way, make us live longer, or at least certainly help us live more, by teaching us to experience more in the same amount of time, by just opening ourselves up. So I don't know, but I'm open to suggestions. Anyone who wants to stay afterwards, we can like grab a few pizzas and just like do a brainstorm. That would be fantastically helpful, actually.
Hi, I did not read your book yet, but I'm good friends with Susan, and I'm in a book club. I'm from Boca. I live in Florida, so I just put it out there for my book club.
Great,
So we're
thank
gonna
you.
read it. I'm just curious, who is your favorite artist right now?
Such a good question. There's so many. I will say that my, I think one kind of track or interest or passion that came out of this experience for me was really just a passion for emerging artists. I mean, I think, you know, if there's kind of another piece of advice that I can offer to everyone, it's that I think that museums are amazing, but there's also something to be said for spending maybe a little less time with the so-called masterpieces and more time with art that is undiscovered, uncelebrated, relatively unknown. And I think that, you know, when you think about how, like having now seen just how messy the fine art world is and how things go into a museum, I mean, they are not necessarily the custodians of the best that culture has to offer. The things that end up there, you know, they are the product of decisions made by individuals who are flawed and subjective and working with limitations like any of us. And, you know, in a way, we are so obsessed with like this farm to table eating, and yet I think we would benefit a lot from kind of moving closer to the source when it came to culture. Both because of the flaws in the machine, you know, both that elevates artists from relative obscurity to fame, but also because there's just so many artists that could use our support. They could use us going to see their work, buying their work, just showing up. And I think if more of us developed our own eye instead of outsourcing it to context, I think we could support a greater diversity of artists, of forms of expression. It was just like, what a world we could build, people. So to answer your question, I mean, there's so many, but there is one artist whose work I really adore and have been obsessed with for a very long time is an artist named Vanessa Gully Santiago. And we did a studio visit, I mean, almost, God, when was it? Yeah, a while ago, I mean, years, when I was in the early stages of this book. And we did one again recently, and she paints these, how would I put this? It's like these post-apocalyptic office scenes, sort of things. Like, I've never seen anything capture, like, the existential angst and ennui of like an office setting the way these paintings do. They're sort of like, I don't know, The Office meets, I don't know, like a less surreal Hieronymus Bosch. Like if you've ever seen like The Garden of Earthly Delights and you're like, ugh. And like her paintings are not surreal, but you're like, this is dark, you know? But it's also kind of funny, and it's just, like my goal is like to have these paintings in every midtown office building. Like I think the world would be better. Like there's a humility to them. It's interesting, it's weird, so check out her work.
Hi, for reference, I'm a sophomore in college studying art history, so I'm finding this to be a very interesting talk. So how would you recommend to engage with the world of art after having had such an intimate connection with this high echelon world? How can you engage with it and, as you said, kind of like take advantage of the nectars of art itself and really appreciate what it means to be immersed in art and have the more, I guess you could say, like personal approach and really deep approach to art without falling prey to the banality of the art world? Because
oh my gosh, guys, we have this is an art historian already. The banality of the art world, I love it. You don't need to finish your next 2 years. You're done, I think. I mean, really. Yeah,
I guess just to start working at the Met. What can I say?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, banality is maybe more Whitney, but whatever. It's splitting hairs. No, but I think. No, it's a great question. You know, I audited, as I said, I didn't study art history, but I audited an art history course because I felt like I needed to. And I will admit that like I was a little disappointed. I mean, and maybe it was just this class, you know, it was a survey class, and people have said, oh, the survey classes. But, you know, to me, it was like these artworks were really, there was an emphasis on interpreting them as historical documents. It's sort of like, what does this reveal about the moment in time, which is absolutely, totally valid. But I was sort of looking for it in like, what do we love about this? Like, why are we still talking about this, you know, hundreds or thousands of years later? And that's perhaps just my bias or interest. So in terms of, for me, for that sort of personal connection with art, I mean, I will say, you know, first of all, like, stay in the work. I mean, look, I still read wall text, I still read press releases. I'm not saying you have to swear them off in its entirety, but I do think that, I think part of my frustration with wall text, especially in museums, is that it tends to be written by art historians, and it tends to function sort of like the answer key at the bottom of a word search. It sort of implies that there's like one right answer, and that art answer has to do with the very specific discipline of art history, that particular way of looking at it. And so I think that, you know, it can be helpful, but I think for me, when you first encounter her work, Julie Curtis, the artist, she described reading the wall text as you're trying to have a conversation with the work, but someone keeps interrupting. And I sort of love that. And I think maybe this is just me having been a guard, spent too much time with art, but in some ways I almost feel like engaging with art like a person begins to, I think, if you think about an artwork like another human being, I think that almost to me is like a shortcut for how to get more out of it. It's like, you gotta give it a chance. Like I said, spend a little more time with the work, give it a chance. Secondly, your best friend may not be my best friend. Like what you love in an artwork may not be what I love in an artwork, and that's okay. I also think that there's, you know, it's like, don't, you know, engage with the work on your own terms, see what you see in it, notice those 5 things. And also, like, don't, you know, rather than sort of like waiting for someone else to tell you all the things that they like or hate about that person. And I will say, when you go to a museum or a gallery, I mean, I used to take a very scorched earth approach to viewing. I felt like I had to see every single thing in the place. That was the only way I got my money's worth. And I began to realize, working as a guard, like, it's sort of like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet and eating like mac and cheese, sushi, and cheese curd or something, and wondering why you feel really ill. Like, you could take an a la carte approach, right? If there's one work that resonates with you, you've done it. And again, give it time. Give it more than 5 seconds. Give it 5 minutes. Give it 15. Give it 50 minutes. But I think to me, it's noticing all those decisions. Like, I love the way that when artists get together and look at an artwork, they're not talking about where someone went to school or who showed their work. They're literally like, I remember Julie Kerr. She was like, that angle hand, like, it looks like a jellyfish. That's amazing. Or like, oh my God, the hair is just incredible. And there was just this excitement, this like gut level excitement that I thought was so fantastic. But that's me. You asked my opinion, so I gave it to you. But someone else might give you, they might be like, you just got to check the price tag. That's how you. Yeah, there.
I can't resist. Thank you, Bianca. Speaking as
this is my mother, for all of you that don't know.
Mother
So,
has to
yeah.
come up with the final one. I guess I've been waiting a while to ask you to remark on an observation made by a Russian critic, Viktor Shklovsky, in 1914. And I was looking to get the quote right, but it seemed to me that what you ultimately revealed to us tonight, which I find to be extremely useful and also extremely productive to be reminded of, maybe because I'm losing.
I'm so sorry, ma'am. Do you have a question?
No, I wanted to make a talk because I'm losing.
Sorry, my mom was a Russian professor.
I'm just going to quote Viktor Shklovsky here in his little article called Art as Device. And he says the following: habit devours objects, clothes, furniture, one's wife, and the fear of war. If all the complex lives of many people go on unconsciously, then such lives are as if they never existed. Art exists in order to return to the stone, the sensation of stoniness. Dixit.
No, I think that there's, I think one of the things, I think just as a final remark, and your question was sort of about engaging more with art, but to bring those two thoughts together, I do think that what is so exciting about is the way that art ultimately radically transforms our experience of the everyday. And I think artists, can kind of drop away the context. They can have that experience, that jostle that our minds get from art with just about everything. And so I remember Julie, I would ask her where she got her inspiration from for her paintings. And it was like, I saw a motorcycle parked by the side of the road. I remarked on how awkward it is to poop in a public toilet. There's this ability, I think, that art teaches you to look at the world with this art mindset. And it's this willingness to sort of question the form, to take an extra beat, to sort of pause and savor the fragile miraculousness of the things around us, and to sort of ask how, why. And so I do think that is something just so exciting. It's that experience. In some ways, like, being around art is sort of like doing drugs, but it's, can be free and certainly isn't bad for you, but it blows your mind, it expands your universe, and I suppose it makes you feel like a stone. I don't know. That wasn't something that it did for me, but I think there's something really transformative about. I always love like going to see art, and one of my favorite parts is when I step out of a gallery museum, I see art everywhere, and it feels magical. It feels like the world is performing for you. So thank you. If you're here, we'll be signing books, hanging out. We can chit chat more or go on your merry ways. But thank you so much all for coming this evening. So grateful.